We need others to survive, but what's more than that, we need others to actually thrive in our lives as well. That element is probably the most important part of our well-being and our resilience, is other people. So we need to think about that. Is that our colleagues, our families, our friends? Like, who are those people? So that's the first thing. So we want to have really great connections with the people around us. Other things that resilient people do is they know the internal resources that they have to overcome their challenges. So when I say internal resources, this might be thinking about your strengths, your skills, your capabilities, your talents that you can actually draw upon in times of need to help you more easily overcome those challenges, but also achieve your goals as well. When we use those things, it does make it much more easier for us.
How do you get 10,000 people to take a step to the left? What's behind the relentless mindset of a world champion? Why do teams of exceptional talent fail? How do you manage the pressure to perform? These are just some of the curious questions we will attempt to answer as we bring you world leaders, curious minds, exceptional talent, successful CEOs, and incredible human beings who know how to inspire great leaders and are inspiring great leaders themselves. I am Craig Johns, high performance leadership expert, international speaker, and CEO of Speakers Institute Corporate and World Sport Coach. This is the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong. Welcome to the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast. Our guest today is a positive psychology and sales leadership expert and the author of the newly released book, Strong. Her education includes a Bachelor of Commerce and Bachelor of Arts from Monash University, a professional certificate in positive psychology with first class honors, and a Masters of Applied Positive Psychology first class honors from the University of Melbourne. Our guest has worked in financial services and national sales roles with the likes of National Australia Bank, MLC, before transitioning into facilitator and training roles at the University of Melbourne, Maxme, and the Michelle McQuaid Group. I have the pleasure of introducing you to someone dedicated to driving engagement, well-being, and performance in the workplace, is an avid marathon runner, and the author of For What It's Worth blog. Anna Glynn. Anna, welcome to the show.
Wow, what an introduction, Craig. I absolutely loved that. I really enjoyed hearing I guess my background, but it's nice to hear it from someone else's voice. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Now, beautiful, you've got a big day today, but before we kind of tap into what's happening on the day that we're actually doing this podcast, I'm really curious, where did you grow up? What was the big dream?
Whoa, that's a nice place to start. So I did grow up in Melbourne, so I am currently residing in the hometown, I guess, but I have spent many years living interstate and certainly overseas as well. I think I probably was quite similar to most kids and just had those big dreams of, being important and working in an organization. I remember when I was young, I always wanted to work with a calculator for some reason, and probably fast forward today, still work with a calculator, but certainly not as fulfilling or rewarding as I probably once thought.
All right, so working with a calculator, so obviously math, you're strong at maths, so then obviously if you're working with calculators, were you someone that was more of a leader or follower during your kind of formative teenage years?
I think the leadership has always been something that's been within me, certainly as a strength. So if I look back, even, primary school, high school days, I did hold leadership positions as well. After that, I went into coaching positions, certainly through, university days. I was often running committees and various groups. Even from a social perspective, I'm often the one that's organizing, catch-ups and, other sort of events or holidays for my friends. So I think that's sort of a running theme that has existed, certainly throughout my past around me taking that leadership role or taking those actions that, probably sit with a leader.
Okay. All right. So if I go back to, those times where you found yourself in leadership roles and it's continued on, if I asked your mum at that point, as a teenager, what would she say were your top 3 strengths?
Well, back then, I reckon there was still a big strength around learning. So I've always been curious, always been a learner, trying to understand, a lot of different concepts and trying to understand perhaps the why behind them. I think on top of that, I've always been a hard worker. So, I was never one that had to be told to go and do my homework. Perhaps unlike my brothers, I was the one that was always up in my room, doing my homework, doing the best, putting in the hard yards to make sure that I could try and achieve really good grades. So again, I think those sort of strengths have probably, come out in those formative years and then still play out to today as well.
And if I spoke to her now, would anything really have shifted? Is there anything that's sort of come through that may have changed or grown during that time?
I don't think so. I think definitely there is still that curiosity. There's still a love of learning. There's still that perseverance, hard work ethic that I have. Perhaps now the focus, and maybe that's also that transition from teenage years to adulthood has gone from me to more thinking about others. So how do I actually grow and develop others to be their best as opposed to just focusing on the I, more about the we and the us.
Now, you talked about brothers. Two or 3 brothers?
3.
3 brothers. All right. So are you younger, older, in the middle? Youngest. All right. So were you always was it competitive? Was it a competitive household?
Probably not so much. I'm a lot younger than them. So the competition would be very hard. Although I wasn't afraid to try and, start fights over the remote control, the TV, show that we were going to watch. So I definitely wasn't afraid to try and take them on. But I don't think I came out as a winner very often.
All right, so you studied in the areas of sort of commerce earlier on, and that led you through to working at NAB or National Australia Bank. Was that your first choice? Was that something you wanted to do? Was work for one of the big banks in Australia?
As part of the university process, I guess as you get towards the end of your degree, you start thinking about, what do I want to do next? Like, what would be the ideal role for me? At the time, I went through the interview process and application process for a lot of different organizations, and I was lucky that I was offered a couple of different roles. I think what actually stood out for me with NAB was potential to move interstate. So again, being early 20s, trying to unleash myself into the wide world, I saw that as something that I definitely wanted to go and explore, and took the role with NAB, where I was actually fortunate to move to Sydney to start my career.
Yeah, wonderful. It's a lot. I like that approach, right? To be able to step out of where you've grown up and want to be able to see different places and experience different cities, and being able to do that through your career is a great opportunity and a great way to do that. As you develop on, you find yourself in sales. How did that come about?
I was really lucky that the first role that I was actually put into was this world of sales. So I was in the sales division of MLC. And I hadn't really heard about sales before certainly throughout my university degree or certainly in high school. You weren't spoken to sales as a career to pursue. But when I got there, I found myself surrounded by like-minded individuals, people that had similar personalities to me, probably similar values, similar interests. And I loved the work that we were doing. So trying to actually, help our clients work through their challenges and grow and develop themselves. So when I got there, it just felt like an area that seemed to fit, or I seemed to click with it. Fast forward to today, and I've realized that, a number of the roles that I've held have actually been sales. And still today, running my own business, I'm still in sales, even though you might not actually hold the title of sales. So it's certainly an area I love, and it is an area that, I feel really good in as well.
Yeah, some people when they hear sales go, they feel a bit icky around it, right? Their mind goes to the used car salesman, and poor old used car salesmen, they get a bit of a bad rap sometimes. But the old school used car salesman or something like that, where it just doesn't feel right for them. But what do we, for you, what do you feel that your strengths were from a sales perspective, and what was it about sales that really caught your attention?
I think first and foremost, I love other people. So I love getting to know them. I love understanding what their needs are, their challenges, what they're trying to achieve. And as part of that process, I love trying to work out, within me, how can I help them with that? So what is it that I might be able to offer them to help them overcome those hurdles or achieve better results or reach their purpose, whatever it might be. So I think first and foremost, it's that strength around relationship building. There's a bit of empathy in there. There's certainly the optimism piece and the positivity piece, which can help build those relationships as well. But I think first and foremost, I'm just really curious about other people.
Yeah, so it's not trying to sell a fridge to an Eskimo type sales where we kind of move, a lot of people can do the transactional sale, maybe even the solution sale. But what you're talking about here is a lot about the relationship selling. And that is, it should be easy, right? We're talking with humans. We're getting to know humans. We do this in our daily lives. But a lot of people actually find relationship selling quite challenging because you may not get the quick win. You've got to be in it for the long game. You've got to be prepared to be patient and, really seek to get to know someone versus just being able to jump in and go, I've got a solution for your problem. And so where do you think sales has shifted in your career? What has been the biggest changes in sales in your career, or are the fundamentals still the same?
I think there has been that shift. So it probably is that understanding that you're not there just to do the transaction. So for me, certainly in my practice, it's about how can I serve others and how can I actually live out my purpose with them. So whether or not I'm actually getting an exchange of value, I want to try and support them the best way I can. So for me, my focus is all around how do I create a more thriving world. So I try and use that as a bit of a lens through all the engagements I have. So if there is an opportunity for me to share insights, talk with people, give articles, give references, whatever it is, I'm happy to hand that over. And the hope, I guess, is that by forming that relationship and building that trust is that when their need arises, when they do need to engage with me, I'm the first person that hopefully they think of.
Yeah, it's that shifting into that space of being a trusted advisor. It's not something you'll get straight away. Like you've got to build that reputation, build that trust with them, build the certainty with them, don't you? So when you're building your relationships with people, what is, obviously you've got that intention of serving them, but do you try and, is your focus first to build trust and permission? Are you trying to do that first, or you really, are you seeking to understand, or is that part of building the trust and permission?
But I think you're right. I think it goes hand in hand together. So I think the way that you build trust is by understanding more about them. Also, on the flip side, them understanding more about you as well. So I, probably just go through that process through, first meeting with someone and trying to uncover, needs, goals, objectives, challenges, exactly what's going on, and sharing more about the work I do and how I might be able to support them as well.
Yeah, so we see a lot of people that will tend to, when they get into a sales situation, maybe they're starting to build a relationship and quickly they'll have a solution. They hear someone's problem and they go, I've got a solution. So how do you ensure that you don't just sit at the first thing that comes to your mind? What is kind of a strategy that you have to ensure that you really get to the real pain point, the real deep root cause?
I think the first thing that I practice that has taken many, many years for me to try and master is the idea of the golden silence. So letting people just speak and allowing that space to really go deep in certain areas, ask more probing questions, trying to, peel back the layers of the onion to, as you said, really identify what that root cause might be. Because when you're building relationships, and certainly when you're talking about the topics that I talk about, it's a lot about well-being and people and perhaps that person themselves. So they might not feel comfortable if they don't know me to just open up and share straight away. So we need to actually build that trust so I can really understand, what is going on with them. I think what can also help is that I have a lot of conversations with people and certainly with leaders. And so I can share insights from other industries, other organizations, other countries, cultures, et cetera, around what might be happening for them. And it can actually be a bit of a validation point. So it can help people to realize, they're not alone in this, and that they're sharing similar problems to others. And so that can actually help uncover or go deeper on some of those challenges when they know they're not alone.
Yeah, it's interesting. And for those listening, if you're not in sales, everything we're sharing here is applicable to you and what you do, because we are all in sales. It may just not have a monetary outcome to it or part of it. But all these skills are when you're influencing someone, when you're having to persuade someone, when you're trying to get buy-in from someone, whether you're a leader or employee or you're a parent dealing with your children, all these skills are applicable. And we always know good things take time. So that ability to be in there for the long term and build that relationship. With COVID, and I suppose there's been a few changes in, I suppose, the way that work is approached in a way. Like we've seen people shorten meetings. We've seen people now, a lot more people working from home or working more in isolation, sometimes coming together. And the way we may interact people and build relationships has changed. From your perspective, some of the changes we're seeing in the workplace, are they supporting that relationship, the long-term relationship, more or less?
I think it comes back to your intention when it comes to relationships. So I'm a firm believer that you don't have to be face-to-face with someone, 9 to 5, 5 days a week to build a great relationship. Because all of us will have examples of when we've had not great relationships when we've been in those scenarios. So I think we need to consider, certainly from a workplace perspective, around how do we create environments where great relationships can flourish and what's actually needed for that. So of course there is going to be part where we need to be face to face, and there's a great energy exchange that can happen when we are more in front of someone in the same room perhaps. But I've certainly been part of workplaces where we've been 100% remote, and I've never felt like I belong more or like I've been more closely connected to the people I work with. So you have to reflect on that and think, well, what happened there that made us actually have that bond? So I think it's a choice that we all have around the type of relationships that we want to build and what's our intention behind those. So if we're really proactive, we're building trust, we're part of cultures where there's that psychological safety present, I don't think that, there should be too much dependency on the location of where those relationships take place.
Yeah, good. I love that. I've had the same experience. It is, look, and it's easier the smaller the businesses too, whether it's online or it's in person, or a bit of a mixture of both. It's a little bit easier when it's a smaller to medium-sized business. For the bigger, larger companies, I don't think too much has really changed, to be honest, because if you're multinational, you're already doing a lot of video calls. You might be doing less face-to-face now because, I think a lot of companies are not traveling as much as what they used to. So there might be a lot more in online meetings. But I've noticed some companies too where they just shorten the amount of meetings to, it's a productivity thing, but then they jam pack more meetings in throughout the day. So have they really been more productive, or are they just building more meetings or more opportunities to do it? So I'm not sure if they've really solved the problem in some cases. But I feel like they miss a lot of the relationship component. The more you shorten the meetings, the harder it is to continue to build that relationship, especially if you've got multiple people on those calls. And I think that's something people are going to have to consider. Now, if we're looking at kind of sales perspectives, when you're in a room and you've got multiple people in the room, and whether you're negotiating something and you're trying to get to a final say, it's a lot easier to pick who's the actual key decision maker in the room, because people's body language will direct towards that person. They may be the quietest person, they may be the unassuming person, but you can always tell. With us online, it's very different. It requires a different skill set to kind of understand the dynamics of the team. What's maybe some of the research or maybe some of your experiences that you've learned when you're maybe in a situation where you've got to influence a group of people and you're trying to get to a resolution on something, or you're trying to get to an outcome? What sort of skills could you use or tactics can you use to try and identify who is that key person?
This response isn't probably going to have a lot of depth to it, but I would just ask.
Yeah.
So usually I will be asking, who is the key decision maker here, or who will be signing off on this, who will be approving this? Now, that might actually happen before the meeting, or it might happen during the meeting. But yeah, it's pretty overt and clear around, working out, well, who is this person? Who has to have the buy-in? And firstly, are they in the room? And secondly, what is it they might need to help with their decision as well?
And that's another good point there too. I love that, right? Just ask. And a lot of times we're too afraid to kind of ask those type of questions. There's nothing wrong with asking that question. But you talked about maybe the key decision makers not in the room. So what is important when it comes to influence, whether it's a sale or whether it might be a decision, when the key influencers or the key decision makers not in the room?
Again, it would be trying to work out, I suppose, with the person or the people that I'm dealing with around, well, what needs to happen next? If it's about getting that sign off or that buy-in, how do we find the time to actually meet with that person? So, you might have done your fact finding and your, thinking about your offer and what services you might provide, in those pre-discussions. But then you obviously need to get to that point of making that decision around, is it a go or a no-go? And how does that occur? What does that person need to actually make that decision? And it probably is going to be a meeting with you, and you'd like that to happen as well. I always want to make sure that I've actually met with that person who is responsible for perhaps the ROI on the investment that they make, and making sure that you're aligned with exactly what they would want to see, from dealing with you as well.
Yeah, because it can be pretty tricky where sometimes you can't access that person and you're relying on the communication skills of the person you're dealing with, one, to be able to articulate what the key decision maker or the person in charge of the return on the ROIs are looking for. But also their ability to then be able to share what you share with them, if in a correct way or in an appropriate manner, that means that it's actually translated to that person what you're trying to say. And that can be difficult sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's, the ideal scenario would be that you are in front of that person, because you're going to be the best person to actually, sell your services or products, for want of a better word. So how can you get in front of them? And I think it probably also, might suggest different things to you if you can't access that person, but they're ultimately responsible. So perhaps you need to sit back and kind of think, well, why can't I get in front of them? If this person is about to invest in me or, something that I offer, why don't they want to meet with me? That might be actually a bit of a warning sign in some regards, or a bit of a white flag to question, well, why would they not want to, meet with me and learn more about what I offer and how I can support them?
Mm. So we're going through a phase right now where in many companies, not all companies, because some companies are naturally thriving in the current environment, Others have probably been challenged like they've never been challenged before, or if they're an older company, it's been a while since they've been challenged in this way from a financial point of view, where, companies, people do have money, but they're less reluctant to spend, and they're a bit more, they will take more time and a little bit more, maybe a bit more indecisive where they'll spend. And so that's, sales leaders tend to come under a lot of pressure from maybe the board or the CEO or the shareholders that are involved in that company, depending on what size it is, or even themselves if they're a sole trader. So from your perspective, what are we seeing in our sales leaders right now? What sort of things are they experiencing? Because some people might be going, oh, I'm feeling this, but I don't know if everyone else is feeling this. So what are you seeing at the moment that sales leaders are facing?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think the pressure that is on sales leaders right now has never been greater. Those challenges that are present currently perhaps haven't been as large or as great as they are in today's environment. So exactly as you said, firstly, we've got changing market conditions, whether it's interest rates or even the working environment, trying to battle this whole hybrid, remote, in-office scenario. We've got technology advancements that, are coming at us that are making it more challenging for people to potentially sell. On top of that, they've also got the pressure coming from above to perform. So whether that's from the board or senior leaders and their CEOs saying, well, we need to deliver because ultimately, sales are responsible for the survival of the organization to some extent. Also, what we're finding is that our employees are asking more of our leaders as well. So all of a sudden, the pressure is being felt from below coming up, and the sales leader gets a bit caught in the middle in trying to protect potentially their team as well. Now, that's the professional context. Also, what we know is that the stress and the pressure is felt at home, because often that person's role, is the family's livelihoods actually depend on their success as well. So the pressure is actually quite hard to escape at the moment. So a lot of sales leaders are feeling stressed or fatigued. They're starting to perhaps feel a bit disengaged. And some of them are actually lacking a bit of confidence and worrying about, how do I lead my teams to success in this environment? And how do I ensure that we do hit our targets? Because if I don't, there is a risk that my job is actually on the line here as well. So certainly I don't think that stress or that pressure has ever felt greater than it does right now.
Because many sales people are on commission basis as well. So it's not just whether you have a job or not, it's around the type of way of life that you can have based on how much money you may have available. Because if you're getting good commissions, then you potentially can buy a more expensive bottle of wine. You could maybe go further than the next town to go on holiday type thing. So there's it's quite shifting. It can be quite shifty for those type of people. I mean, obviously, when things are going well, markets are strong, the confidence is out there from a financial perspective, then it's a lot easier for a salesperson to hold a consistent level of commission. But in times like this, it can fluctuate quite a bit too, and depending on the industry. So you're talking about, quite a bit of weight now. We maybe feel that the pressures could be bigger than potentially what they've been before. What sort of proactive things do sales leaders need to put in place to make sure that they can perform at their best in this environment?
So I think first and foremost, it's about what's the tool set and the mindset that I have to actually be able to navigate these challenges, handle the pressure well, but then also thrive in spite of it. So I love that you positioned it in that way, Craig, where you said, what do they need to be proactive and intentional about? Because some of these strategies, they don't just become inherent to us. So some things, yes, we are born with, but other things we actually need to take action around. So the two things that certainly come to mind, which do have a really lovely relationship, is first one around resilience. So do we have the strategies to actually cope well, but what's more than that, actually grow and develop because of those challenges and those struggles that we've gone through. Now, the good news is that humans are pretty resilient. Like, look at what we kind of endure day to day, personally or professionally. But again, we can adopt certain strategies to build more resilience. The second part of that, as I said, ties in nicely, is one of the traits of resilient people is that they have an optimistic mindset. Now, that's really important in sales, more so than a lot of other roles that exist. Because when you think about it, an optimistic mindset is what helps us, continue, when we have been knocked back by clients time and time again. So it speaks to that long-term strategy that we were talking about earlier in the conversation. The beauty of optimism as well is, again, some people naturally come with a high level of optimism. And typically when I ask salespeople and we measure their levels of optimism and pessimism, I'm going to probably find that salespeople tend to be more optimistic because that's why they're naturally drawn to those sort of roles. You can also improve your optimism. It is something that can be learned. So again, there's a certain set of thoughts that optimists have compared to pessimists. And what we know about those thought patterns is they can have a big impact on the way that we act and then the way that we feel as well. But all of them, resilience and optimism, certainly do take that concentrated effort to actually improve.
Okay, so let's dive into these because we're kind of sitting at the what right now, but and it's easy to hear the what, but we want to know how we get to do that. Talking about resilience, right? We do lots of things in our life that make us resilient along the way. So what are some ways that we can build resilience in a proactive way? What are some great examples of this that may suit, whether it's a sales leader or not, just any person? What are some tools that we can put in place?
First question I like to ask people, exactly as I said, we've all gone through challenges in the past. So I like people to reflect on what they've already used to help them get through those times, because the science will, of course, share with us some things that we might not know, but then there'll be a lot of validation of things that we're already doing. So here I might just ask, the listeners to think about, what's helped me get through those challenging times in the past? From studies, what we've uncovered is, first and foremost, to help us get through challenges, we need other people.
Yeah.
So as a human species, we would not have survived if we were out there on our own, right? We need others to survive. But what's more than that, we need others to actually thrive in our lives as well. That element is probably the most important part of our well-being and our resilience is other people. So we need to think about that. Is that our colleagues, our families, our friends? Like, who are those people? So that's the first thing. So we want to have really great connections with the people around us. Other things that resilient people do is they know the internal resources that they have to overcome their challenges. So when I say internal resources, this might be thinking about your strengths, your skills, your capabilities, your talents that you can actually draw upon in times of need to help you more easily overcome those challenges, but also achieve your goals as well. When we use those things, it does make it much more easier for us. Other areas that help resilient people is having that connection to purpose. So when we're going through those really tough times, trying to understand, like, what's the bigger picture here? What's kind of my, northern star or that light that I'm working towards? Certainly during the, heightened pandemic times, we saw that as a big driver or motivator of people to actually get out of bed, where they could understand, well, why am I getting out of bed? How does this tie in with the bigger picture? So there's some of the things that we see with more resilient people. The other beauty of resilience is that it's not impacted by things like our gender, our age, our cultures, or anything like that. So when we look at those factors that help people get through, it isn't dependent on some of those other areas, which other elements often are.
Yeah, okay, I like that. This is good. All right, so some great tools there to kind of really lean in. What are your past experiences? What are your strengths? What are those areas that you can leverage that you do naturally well? and the power of putting people around you that are optimistic themselves. And that's a challenge, right? That's an interesting one. Sometimes I sit there and go, okay, cool. If you keep just surrounding yourselves with really optimistic and great people, that's fine. But what happens to all these people that may be struggling in life? What happens to these people? So we still need to make sure we take care of those people, because that ability to serve and help someone in need also can help build our resilience and can also help us remain humble and service in the right way. But it's around making sure, from my perspective, it's around making sure you've got the right people around you in the right moments that have an optimistic viewpoint.
That's it. And the thing with optimism as well, it's got all these incredibly great qualities with it and outcomes as a result as well. But what we know about optimism is that there is such thing as too much optimism. Okay, so with the analogy we use here is like Pollyanna. So if we remember the red-haired, freckle-faced girl, she was always about the rainbows and the butterflies and the sunshine. So there is this thing called the Pollyanna principle. So it is when we have too much optimism. So this strategy backfires for people and certainly for leaders where we might be part of a really challenging environment. So let's take, those heightened pandemic times where all of a sudden, it was more difficult to hit targets and hit budgets. What can happen if people are too optimistic is they dismiss those challenges. So they just try and hide them or push them away. And they want to focus on, still achieving outcomes and being positive about the future. So what I like to talk about is realistic optimism. So yes, we have positive expectations about the future. The future will be bright and better, but we are very aware of the challenges of the present, and we are being proactive with the ways that we actually overcome them. If we are that Pollyanna, and certainly as a leader, it backfires on teams. And I saw that happen, during those incredibly difficult few years we had where, leaders wanted to be really optimistic, but they were dismissing the present. So what that meant for their teams is their teams were questioning, well, why aren't I feeling so positive? Why is my leader telling me I'm going to reach my goals, but I don't think I can? They didn't feel safe to speak up and talk about their challenges or the hurdles they were facing. So it actually eroded psychological safety and trust. So it was a strategy that, certainly has and can backfire for people when we're too optimistic.
Yeah, I found it really interesting because we got a global team. I was, also working in some other areas where we had people from around the world in different states. And I was in Canberra, so we had it pretty easy during COVID. Very easy. We went 400 days without a case, and we pretty much got to live our life apart from stepping into New South Wales or Victoria at that point. But we could pretty much just live a normal life. And for me, coming off a farm where the nearest neighbor was a mile away, and being an endurance athlete, we spent a lot of time on your own, in your own head. I was kind of in my happy place. We had a business that grew exponentially, but I couldn't really share that all the time. I had to hold back because I knew that if I went out there showing my optimistic life and the great life I was enjoying compared to what someone else might be, that it wouldn't have served either me or them well at all. And so it was really interesting that you've got to, I like that realistic optimism and having that approach of knowing when's appropriate to bring it out, because we can, as you say, overdo it. Not only do we get Pollyanna, where we may dismiss the challenges that we're facing, but we can also just kind of distance ourselves from other people because they're just going, this is too much. It's too far away. The gap is too big from where I'm currently at. Can you have some empathy or compassion for me?
It certainly takes a bit of emotional intelligence. And I think what would be really interesting is to study the differences in cultures. So I wonder whether something like the tall poppy syndrome plays a role in exactly what you spoke about of not wanting to celebrate your success during that tough time, or, stand up and say, look at all these great things I'm achieving, also because of that cultural element. I wonder whether in other cultures, whether that might be the same, or a similar scenario, or it might be quite different.
Yeah, I mean, tall poppy is a whole different ballgame, I think, maybe to what we were experiencing during that time, because it was more around your personal experience. It was experience of the time versus what had you achieved. So I think a little bit more at that time. Thinking about tall poppy, I find it fascinating, right? We use this term, we talk about it regularly, but still in many countries and cultures, we keep doing it. I had a great conversation with a friend of mine from 20, we haven't talked to each other for 20 years until about a couple of days ago. And talking to that person, they come from New Zealand, and I talked about, they said, look, we've seen where you've gone, and I talked about my experience. And I said one of the big difficult thing was coming from New Zealand, where we're very humble. We don't talk about our achievements or accolades. Moving into a space where, being a speaker and things like that you had to put your name out there. And if you don't, no one knows who you are and what you've done. Or if you're transitioning into a new career, for instance, if you hadn't put out there some of your achievements and that this is what you want to be, maybe you're not doing it right now. For me, it was putting out there high performance leadership expert. Until I put that out there, who knew I was a high performance leadership expert? They still thought I was a CEO of a sport organization. So you're being able to shift that mentality, and interesting talking to that person, they can't get their head around shifting away from what is so normal in New Zealand, and I feel that's why I talk about pride now. There's nothing wrong with pride in many cases. Yes, pride can stop you from learning and growing if you let it control you, but you should take pride in what you have achieved and be able to share that rather than just kind of play quiet or play small to either make someone feel better or not feel like you're trying to outcompete someone in a way. I'm fascinated why tall poppy still exists, especially when you go to America and it's complete opposite.
That's what I was probably alluding to, studies in different cultures, what it might be like. But yeah, I see it often where, even as you said, talking about, your strengths and these qualities that you've built, it can be difficult for us. When I stand in front of a room and I say, hands up if you want to go and tell me your strengths, you won't see many hands up. But if I say, hey, what about if you tell me all the things that are wrong with you? Hands, fly up. People are more confident and more happy to share what's not great about me or what am I working on, as opposed to, standing up and saying, look at all these beautiful qualities that I come with.
I wonder where that behavior has kind of come from in a way. Is it a protective mechanism from, the 10,000 plus years ago of people trying to just survive, right? And seeking the problem? Or has it come from the way we did education earlier on where you weren't supposed to stand out, or maybe we were supposed to stand out, but now it's all changed that, no one knows where you really stand in the world. I don't know, but it's a fascinating human behavior we have, right? Where we're quite happy. Oh, well, not always happy. Some people are willing to be vulnerable and share what's wrong with them. The others will still stick away from that. There'll be some that won't share their vulnerabilities or their successes. And then there'll be those that stand up with successes, and then there'll be people in the room who are trying to take them down or disassociate with them because, why are you standing out?
We're a very weird species, aren't we, in that regard? But I think you're right. I think there is some external factors that do play a role. That one being that negativity bias, which, as you said, helped our species survive many years ago, and now, it's not so much a survival mechanism, but it means that we do focus more on our gaps, our shortcomings, what's wrong, what don't we have, as opposed to what we do have and what's right with us. And same thing, I think, as you said, the education system, but certainly from a workplace system perspective, again, certainly the upbringing that I had in the corporate space was to focus on my gaps and to focus on my weaknesses and get good at them. So, that was definitely the influence that, was put on me was, let's think about all the things that you're not good at and let's focus on getting better at them, as opposed to the smarter strategy, which is, hey, let's work out all the things you're good at and let's get great at them. So I think even organizations traditionally have influenced us to try and become those all-rounders and to not specialize and be good at what we're great at. And that, we can see that in performance conversations, in the way we build strategies, even, conversations we have with our leaders, templates that I see within organizations. Like, often it is not asking us those questions around what we're good at. There is more weight put onto, where we're failing.
Now, I saw, they probably, I don't know if they still have report cards like that. I'll find out in a few years' time when my daughter goes to school. But when we were in school, I imagine you would have been the same as me. We had the, the A+, the A minus, etc. And, naturally the parents' attention would draw towards the C or the D. Let's fix those.
Yep.
Rather than really celebrating what they were good at and going, okay, how do we take these to great? And, like for me, I failed English. I managed to pass it right at the end of high school, but I failed it. And I put hours into that. But at what cost? The cost of what I was really strong at went from A pluses or A's down to A minuses or B's. And I'm like, what served me there? Just to either make me feel good or just to kind of look good in the system that I passed everything, versus I'm just really strong at these. Let's focus on those. How can we leverage those?
We see it in school. We see it in sports. Same thing if you're coaching on the sidelines. I've worked with a teacher who is also an AFL coach, and he said the same thing to me. He said, Anna, I've been coaching for 30 years, and literally the card that I fill out at the end of the games is ask me the areas that the players need to improve on. Where did they make mistakes? He said there's actually not a space for me to write what did they do well. So he changed that, and he came back to me a couple of months later and just said, wow, like the impact and the change that it had with his relationships with players was just amazing.
Yeah, it's so important. We've got to. Yes, we still need to, there might be gaps where we need to improve, because if you look at a sports perspective, if your tackling's not good and you play, say, rugby, even though you might be a great try scorer, that means you're going to have to score more tries than you let in.
Yes.
But that still may cause problems. So if you want to be great at what you do, then you may have to, overcome those gaps more than worry so much on weaknesses in a way. So I think there's a slight difference. What are those gaps that you need to support your strengths versus what are those weaknesses that really are not going to have any, not really going to serve you?
We can think about it from a perspective of, you don't see Roger Federer trying to get really good at swimming. As an example, like he has well and truly played to his strengths. He probably is naturally gifted at other sports, but he's focused on that one.
Yeah, it's good. I like it. Now, you've really, for you spent a lot of time drawing into the area of positive psychology. And, obviously we need that when you need the optimism, the resilience aspect. What other aspects of positive psychology are crucial when it comes to a sales leader?
Positive psychology is the field that studies what leads to thriving individuals, leaders, teams, organizations, communities, societies. So it really answers a whole lot of questions that leaders have within workplaces around how do I get my team to be at their best? How can I be at my best? How do the individuals? Because ultimately that's going to ensure that the organization, thrives as well. So there is, the resilience, the optimism piece. It teaches or shares a lot more about, why we need strong relationships. We've spoken about that already in the conversation, for survival, but also for the great times as well. It also, asks us to look at things like, what does bring us meaning and purpose in our lives? How can we actually achieve that within our work? Because obviously we spend a lot of time at our work, so we want to be able to try and derive meaning from it as well. The area also looks at, things like how do we make sure we're really engaged in our work? So yes, again, work is where that can occur, but also in our lives. So what gets us, deeply satisfied? What type of work should we be doing that might actually lead us to experience things like flow, which is, us at our most engaged and certainly us performing at our best. So it's definitely something that leaders want to be bringing on more with their team. It also might look at things like, how do we spark more positivity in our workplace? What we know about when we're in a more positive state, we're more creative, we're more innovative, we're more able to problem solve. We actually tend to create better relationships with those around us. So again, talking about, that concept where we do focus a lot more on the negative, how do we intentionally boost the positive? Because again, it leads to all these really great outcomes. So at a high level, this is what this field is starting to uncover. What are those elements that need to be present for us all to be at our best?
Okay, great. I like that. And I think, look, for me, when I look at leadership, I see a lot of people get really confused around leadership. They get overwhelmed with what is leadership, because they've been told you must be an empathetic leader, you must be a strategic leader, you must be this type of leader. No, you must be this leader. Well, no, you need to be all of those. But the fundamentals of leadership, the fundamentals of being high performing haven't changed at all. And so it's interesting, like for me growing up in sport, I was very fortunate to be in environments where we never talked about positive psychology, but I felt like the environments I was in created these amazing experiences around this naturally. And so it comes quite naturally because you're surrounded by it. But if you're surrounded by maybe negative environments in your upbringing or in your schooling life or even in your work life, it can be quite a challenge to switch through to a more positive, optimistic, more way of looking at things. And so if you've got someone who might be stuck, someone who may have been through some challenging times on a personal level, or may have had challenging times in a workplace, and they're feeling pretty down, how can we start to switch them? And I know it's a pretty loaded, big question, but how can we start to switch these people into a more positive mindset when they've been so used to negative situations?
The best thing is to start small. So, with anything new, we want to try and break it down into something really small. So there's this great saying in the field, tiny is mighty. So we don't want to try and overhaul this person, completely get them to shift, try and get people to commit to a huge number of goals, which are going to be really hard to try and navigate in probably what is already a very full life. So my advice to groups that I, teach these concepts with is work out exactly what it is that you need, because research will tell us what works for the majority of the people the majority of the time, but we need to make sure that it actually fits that person, exactly what their needs are, the type of person they are, what will actually potentially work for them. I also encourage people to know that it's a learning journey. So you will make mistakes. You will, fall short of what you set out to do. It'll be messy. It'll be uncomfortable, but we know that's when the learning and the growth occurs. So I want people to welcome that. And then we want to start to think about, use it as a bit of a test. So did these things work? What did, what didn't? And then how do we change going forward? So I think when we break off something and make it a really tiny action that they can commit to, as long as they can commit to it over time, the idea is that hopefully over the longer term, you're going to create more of that shift.
Okay, great. Now, at the beginning, I spoke about this is a big day for you today. You've got the book launch of your very first book, Strong, and I'm just kind of looking through my notes here, and pretty much everything we've covered so far is things that are coming through in the book. Is there what was the reason why you created Strong, and is there anything else we haven't talked about today that you feel is important for people to understand that they can find from leaning into this book and giving it a read?
think you raised a scenario earlier about that leader that, didn't know what to do. You inherit a team, you're given a team of people to suddenly lead and to drive outcomes like making sure they're engaged, making sure they're well, and ultimately making sure they perform. I know they were the things that were on my scorecard when I was leading teams. And we can go on some great training programs and have some good coaches and mentors around, but maybe some of the listeners like myself, you don't feel confident around what is it that you're meant to do. And I'm quite a practical person. So I didn't want to know another theory. I wanted to actually know what are the actions, the specific things that I need to be doing with my team.
Great.
Now, when we're trying to drive those outcomes that I mentioned, we need to then be going back to what are the actions that can actually help lead to them. So sometimes, those theories that we learn about leadership and, it can get confusing. So with this book, or the reason why I wrote it is I wrote it for that person that is trying to understand what are those strategies that lead to outcomes that I desire. Certainly what the leader wants, but then certainly what the business wants. So for me, it is a practical guide around, what is it that the leader can actually do with members. So the focus here is on the leader and the team. So it's for that person that perhaps is lacking that confidence, or it might be for the other leaders who are doing, a really, really great job, but they actually aren't sure why. So it might be a good validation of, yeah, I already do that. And there might be some new things that they pick up as well. So it is certainly written for those people that want to learn those strategies and understand what actually leads to better results, better engagement, and then ultimately the thriving of the person and the team.
I love that. All right. So you're into positive psychology. I'm someone who's fascinated by human behavior. I'm curious, why do you have all the books behind you color-coded in that order?
Well, because, my strength is the appreciation of beauty and excellence, correct? Why else? No, I'm a lover of beautiful things, and that's probably stemming out in the color coordination, but also making sure that it's beautiful for all the people that I talk to in this way have something to look at as opposed to perhaps just my face.
Good answer. I like that. We all know smart people have great answers, but the most successful people ask great questions. When was the last time you did something for the first time?
Ooh, this is a good question. And, apart from the kind of answer that I should give around writing a book, because it was my first one, and obviously that was the first time I did that, I probably reflect on something that happened just over the weekend. So being incredibly warm in Melbourne, I was spending a lot of time in the pool. And like yourself, I've got a young child who's 18 months. And he hasn't done swimming lessons because that was something that I had mixed advice on. But I thought, you know what, we've got some time in the pool. I want to teach him to swim. So I Googled, what do 18-month-olds need to start to learn, in terms of swimming? So there was, blowing bubbles, being comfortable around the water, jumping off the edge into mum or dad's arms, and then floating on the back. So I went, right, that is what we're going to spend our time doing. So it's a new way of me teaching someone, a new audience member, if you will, in terms of an 18-month-old. And yeah, we spent lots of time doing exactly that, jumping off the side, blowing bubbles, floating on back. And we had a lot of fun doing it. And I think we did a pretty good job as well.
Beautiful. It's an important and valuable life skill. So good to hear that. What is the one question that you would love to solve?
Another great question asked by you. I think one of my questions that I often think about, now this is not from a judgmental perspective, it's more a place of curiosity. But there is a question that I want to ask of a lot of people in the world, and that's what's happened to you. So I think there are a lot of people in this world that undertake actions, do things, say things that, might be misaligned to me and my values, but also others, where we really question those choices that they're making. And I really want to explore what's happened that's led you to believe that that is the right action or thought to be having at that point in time? So I think my question would be, from a curiosity perspective, like what has happened to you over your past?
That is a cracking question. I like that. For you, what is an inspiring great leader, and who is a great example of this?
I'm lucky that there's a long list. I think, though, if I reflect on great leaders, for me, it really is the ones that put people first. Now, I know that might be a bit of a cliche, but I do engage with a lot of leaders, and you can tell the ones that say that their people come first and it's lip service. It's written on the website. They'll talk about it in interviews, but in reality, it is absolutely not the case. But then I do come across some incredible leaders who really understand that their people are what's going to drive their success, and their actions speak louder than their words. So, I think those leaders are the ones that I definitely admire, because it can be hard to do that when you do have pressure and outcomes that you need to deliver. But perhaps they've made that shift in their mindset that, the people, it might be a longer term play, but the people absolutely are the way we get there. Some great examples, in Australia, clients I work with, Vision Australia, incredible in terms of the leadership that exists there. Also AIA Australia as well. I've heard some great things about the culture that's being built there. And also organizations like PEXA as well. From a non-organizational perspective, I think we can gain great lessons, from your old realm, the sporting field. We see some great coaches that really are putting their players first and focusing a lot on those off-field factors as opposed to perhaps just the on-field. And then also in our education system and in some of the teachers that, are working with our kids, there's some great examples of leaders there as well.
Beautiful. It's been a fascinating and really enjoyable conversation today, and I'm sure our listeners would like to know more. So how can people learn more about what you do, and what is the best way for people to connect with you?
I think the best way would be via my website, which is annaglynn.com.au. I also am on LinkedIn, and I'm regularly sharing, ideas and insights and tips from the field of positive psychology and beyond. And I always love connecting with people. So whether that is via the socials or certainly an email or a phone call, I am always open to having a chat.
Outstanding. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. I've loved learning, hearing the insights from you around, being the youngest of your siblings and how you would try, stand up for yourself, to then going into finding yourself in sales and finding that naturally because it suited your strengths, to how you work with other people throughout your career as a leader to make sure you're really identifying and helping support people in their strengths and helping them be able to work more effectively and enjoy what they do working with other people, to now where you are supporting other organizations or leaders to ensure that we have more effective companies and workplaces so that people can thrive and tap into their potential and be able to utilize their strengths and really enjoy what they're doing. So thank you very much for the conversation. All the best for your book launch later today. I'm really, really excited. And by the time people listen to this, it would have happened and the books will be on the bookshelves. So all the best with Strong, and thank you very much. I look forward to continuing the conversation another time.
Thank you, Craig. It's been great. I really loved the conversation.
It's time for you to join the Inspiring Great Leaders movement by visiting craigjohns.com.au. Share this podcast on LinkedIn and be sure to hashtag Inspiring Great Leaders. We would love it if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Drop us a line with your feedback and questions and connect with us on the Craig Johns LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram pages. Be sure to check out the next Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong.